To wrap things up, possibly, I would like to ask Andrea to tell us about how good we might be in doing spatial planning, and how we might find out whether we are good in doing good or not.
Thank you, Holger. Well, you actually the issue was already up. I think it's one of the topics of the Coexist project, and I would be very happy to have some kind of interaction on that. I'm working as a scientific analyst and coordinator at the Swedish Institute for the Marine Environment. And just last year, in the autumn the year before, we had a study on evaluation of marine spatial planning and what is the state of the art and what are the needs for Sweden. And I have to learn how, this is like the Mac environment right now, new version, great. I'm a Mac user. And what I'm shortly, I will skip the first part or just jump through it because we have heard a lot of it in the last sessions yesterday, but I would like to just present shortly our approach, how we have been thinking and what our findings are and conclusions and outlook with regard to research, because we think that there is a need for method development with regard to evaluation, and there is also need to couple the more strategic evaluation beforehand with the afterwards evaluation. And there's a lot of interesting work to do, both from a social and from a natural and from a science and from a modeling perspective. Yes, I hope you're not too tired. Otherwise, we can have a short break. So yeah, we have the ecosystem problems, we have the different conflict areas and overlaps, and we have this huge institutional complexity we have to deal with, and how are we going to do that? And Sweden is just has been doing spatial planning at the municipal level within the territorial waters since the 1980s, but the municipalities have not been very busy doing planning in the last years, but they're just now catching up again because we have a new authority who is planning, and because some municipalities have actually seen that there is a need to plan because they have conflicts or problems to solve by spatial means. And what is interesting is that the spatial planning system will overlap by 11 nautical miles in the outer territorial waters. And the Solomonic decision so far has been by the Swedish government that, or by those presenting the proposal that has just been accepted, is that if a license is going to be given in the overlapping zone, both the municipal plan and the national plan will have to be considered. So the problem has to be solved on a case-by-case basis if there are any conflicts between the two. Yeah, and then we have had some external drivers also for promoting our national and local spatial planning. But yeah, what about the status and the drivers of evaluation, and what kinds of evaluation do we need in Sweden? Oh, I just shouldn't fall over this. What we did is tried to create some kind of a conceptual framework. I will just come to it. And based on that, we did a literature review of both relevant method literature and scientific proof, whether there are any environmental effects, because we are the Swedish Institute for the Marine Environment, so we were especially interested in environmental effects of activities and planning. And we came to quite interesting conclusions there. And then we did, with regard to Sweden, a needs gap analysis. What is the practice so far? And here we also had to say that, there's not so much practice yet. Actually, I would like to ask you now, the audience, who is from a country who is actually practicing evaluation of marine spatial planning? None. Of course, Germany. What about Norway? I think they have some kind of evaluation, isn't it? Yeah, you have these national plans, and now they have a report in between, and then there's the new plan coming. So there are some countries who are already a bit farther. So we have some people to look up to, and to ask for advice. But let's see. And the last thing is that we have been thinking about both recommendations more for Swedish context, but also for general. And here we see this need for collaboration. And yeah, it was about 50 experts we tried to contact, and about half of them, more than half, have replied. So we think it is rather something that is more or less reliable. So what is an evaluation? It's a process to determine the value of something, in that case of a plan and the planning process. And it is, somehow has to measure what kinds of achievements the plan has in relation to the process, outputs, outcomes, and the impacts of the plan. And the important thing is there are no absolute values. They are often relative, and they have to be in relation to something. And then the question is, what is this something? Or is this the vision in the beginning of the plan? Is this concrete objectives? Or how does this look like? And is it more like the very general, rather fuzzy objectives we would like to have a clean sea, or is it like a target we want to have so and so many square kilometers of marine protected areas, which is much easier to measure? And then also there are different plan types, and we've just had this very clearly also yesterday, that there's different countries, and some plans are more like a strategic vision, which is the Swedish way of planning. Others are more towards binding management plans. And what kinds of scopes do we have with space and time? So yeah, what can we do? What can we evaluate? Looking at the conceptual framework, we have, so to say, we can see this is some kind of a step from a planning process to plan to its implementation in different sectors in the administration and probably also in society, to the activities and effects in the environment. And then, of course, there are, on one hand, overarching objectives and processes. If we now think this is Sweden, then we have the European Union, or HELCOM, VASAB, OSPAR, and so on, or the global agreements. And then we have external factors like economic crisis or developments, technical developments, and so on, that may also affect the outcomes. And what you have to think of is also that these arrows are no straight arrows. These are somehow both a connection, but it's also a filter, because what is happening here doesn't end up 100% here for different reasons. And that's an interesting research in itself. So if we look at the findings with regard to the review, you can see the lines. They are, so to say, studies that are describing the planning process in relation to the plan, or just the plan, or evaluating implementation, or evaluating the connection between activities and effects in environment society. But it's only descriptive. Whereas if you see the arrows, you have an analysis of the couplings between higher level processes and plan, or spatial elements and activities, spatial elements of plan and implementation, and so on. And here, one study, effects on the environment. And if we are looking at now, this is coast and sea planning, and we just realized there's so few studies. And there's so few studies actually establishing some kind of a link between a plan and the effects over there. There's some external factors looking at evaluation from that, or higher level process and plan. So this is really rather scarce. And if we look at the land planning studies that we are evaluated, then we were looking at the effects of higher level processes on the planning process. And the only larger amount of studies was about spatial effects of the plan on activities, and that was usually housing or development activities. But there's nothing here. This connection is lacking, at least in the planning literature. So what we see is also there is a need to connect planning literature with environmental science literature, and having really the thinking going all the way through. So yeah, our recommendation, of course, is to continue with research and try to close these gaps. And with regard to the practical how to implement this in Sweden, we found that we wanted to ask experts, and we asked experts from different levels. We asked the experts from different disciplines, and tried to find out, what is important? What should we evaluate? What are the important problems with regard to implementation? And what do we need to do with the stakeholders? So what they actually agree upon is that evaluation is necessary and urgent. There are important problems. There is a lack of practice or methods. There are institutional gaps, and that's something that we also have realized in the conference. Environment and planning and administrative levels. There are expertise gaps, both with regard to experience, knowledge and skills, and there are contrasting views between planners and the environment. So the message was try to evaluate the whole chain, and including process and impacts. And the implementation is important. And then there's different priorities between municipal or higher level planners, what other things they would like to evaluate. It is important to think about how do you evaluate. Are you based on a goal indicator approach, or are you actually having some kind of a theory about how different things affect each other? These are totally different approaches, but they can be coupled and integrate objectives from other levels, higher levels. Yeah, and then with regard to the system and who is supposed to participate, it's important to include stakeholders, but evaluation should be independent, and there is usually confusion about what stakeholder involvement is, what the purpose is. So this needs to be thought through and discussed. So what is the role of different people in that process and when? And there are quite a few obstacles: resources and time, data availability, capacity, the fragmentation in the institutional system with regard to different aspects, both responsibilities, communication and knowledge, and also between politics and experts. So we have needs and gaps. We have needs in the policy landscape with regard to evaluation of marine and coastal planning, and we have interesting gaps for research. So we think evaluation is underrated but important. It's not practiced. There are institutional gaps to close, and we need better integration and international overview and exchange. And my question is rather, okay, why is there little evaluation? What can we do about linkages and the test? How can we test combining perspectives and methods between different? So this is like, yeah, there's lots of calls, and there's money somewhere out there. Please contact us. We're available.
Thank you, Andrea. I guess we have time for 2 questions before we all head to lunch, for which we are really happy, I guess.
Thanks, Olga. Thanks, Andrea, for putting that important issue on the agenda, really. I think you've made an important point that we need to distinguish between what exactly we are trying to evaluate. That has to be absolutely clear from the beginning. And I think there tends to be confusion between evaluating the process on the one hand, you know, how we get from initial stages to a plan and into implementation, and the impact of the plan. And again, the impact can be the social impact, the economic impact, the environmental impact. And that's actually a lot harder, I think, to measure and to evaluate, because you're having to sort of tease out the effects of the plan from lots of other confounding factors, really. And there, I think, we need a lot more thought and a lot more research in particular. So no question, just a comment.
I so much agree.
Hi, Andrea. I'm Kees Vlak from the Netherlands, and I almost spent 1 year of my life in a department evaluating spatial plans. So I have a bit of a feeling that it is a hard thing to do. And why is it such a hard thing to do? Because it's usually much easier to evaluate a positive action, something has been done. And a lot of effects of spatial planning are things that are not done. Spatial plans regulate activities, and part of that regulation is that lots of things go in a different way than they would otherwise have been done. So, for instance, the thing we just had with fishery in the Baltic, effectuated by spatial constraints. It's very hard to evaluate how things would have gone if you would not have done it on place A instead of place B. So that's always very, very, very tricky. And I wish you a lot of wisdom with it.
Thank you very much. You're pointing out a very important thing, and we also asked ourselves, but why is there so little evaluation? Because there are some obstacles to it, and how do we, somehow we are forced to prove, if we want to do marine spatial planning, if we want to say that it is a good tool, why is it a good tool? So somehow we still need to prove that it is actually a good tool and it's good for society and the environment. So we're a little bit in a difficult situation here, and I would rather like to develop this kind of dialogue, and that's also one of the social science research questions we have. Why is there so little evaluation? And another thing is that there's a lot of grey literature, but and there's also politicians, but maybe they don't want to be evaluated. So there's lots of different reasons why things are not happening and why evaluations are not there.
Thank you, Andrea. We have explored now many different dimensions of marine spatial planning and several aspects of it. I would say that by now we should explore the different dimensions of good food.